week later is what we're going to be looking at, and so everything else is good. So if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn there. But as you do, I want you to think this morning, have you ever believed in something so much, or someone so much? Like you just knew that idea, that business proposition, that person was going to make it, that politician was going to fix it, that job was going to make it all right. Have you ever believed in something so much, and then it failed you? It didn't work out. They weren't who they said they were. The job just created more problems, and it was just as unhealthy as it was before. Have you ever been in that place just completely rocked by something you believed in with everything that you had? See, that's where Thomas is. We're going to be looking at Thomas, the disciple, but we oftentimes go, well, he's doubting Thomas, but really he was disappointed Thomas. He was disillusioned Thomas. He was disoriented Thomas because the guy that he had just been following for the last 3 years of his life is now dead. This was what I was putting everything in. I was all in on Jesus. And now what? See, I think a lot of us understand what Thomas was feeling. In that moment of going, why, God? I wasn't expecting this. This wasn't how it was supposed to work out. That was supposed to save the day. And I don't know where to turn now. I think we resonate with Thomas more than we understand. I'm not here to bash Thomas today. We can use him as a punching bag in Christian circles, but we're not here to bash him. We're here to understand him. And here's what I want you to get as we begin. Jesus didn't condemn Thomas. He came to him. Jesus drew near to Thomas. He doesn't push him away because of his struggles to believe. And so that's the logic I want you to have. See, Thomas had started following Jesus. He'd probably been with him for 3 years. He's watched him heal. He's watched him teach. He's heard his lessons. He's had even the small conversations along the road paths that we don't even have recorded here. Thomas has watched Jesus be the Messiah, do miraculous things. He was all in because he's never seen anybody do what Jesus has done. And then Thomas watched Jesus die. A brutal death, a terrible death. A death that we would have to look away because it was so gruesome and vile. And I want you to remember, as we talked about two Sundays ago, that Saturday after Jesus was dead was not a hopeful day. It was a heartbreak day. Nobody was waiting on a resurrection. Everybody was weeping. Saturday was a day of weeping, not waiting. Sunday, remember, Mary and the other women were going to the tomb to go and to help Febreze a decaying corpse, is why they had the spices and the ointments. They were just trying to make it not smell as bad. They were showing up to a tomb of a person they expected dead. Remember the confusion when the tomb was empty and Peter and John are still confused. Mary is still confused. She's just looking for who took the dead body. Nobody was expecting a resurrection. And so when Jesus shows up in the upper room, or in the room behind locked doors in John chapter 20, verses 20 through 24, this throws us off completely. Nobody was expecting this. He says this in John chapter 20. I don't have it on the screen, but just listen with me. Or verse 19. That evening, the first day, that Sunday, while the doors were locked, they were fearful of the Jews. Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, "Peace be with you." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were glad because they saw the Lord. Nobody was expecting a resurrection. And last week on Easter, I said this. I said, hey, we have the story of the empty tomb. We have reliable witnesses who speak of this and who gave their life with zero incentive to give their life, but they lived their life completely convinced of what they said they saw. And I encouraged you, I said, will you take and trust what these reliable sources who were willing to give their life, and it made no sense for them to give their life, will you trust them? And will you also believe in the empty tomb? Because the historical Jesus, we said, is pretty much a fact. The question is, do you believe the tomb is empty? This morning, I want to unpack the story of a guy who couldn't just trust the reliable sources. See, I called you to trust James and John and Peter and others that had seen, but you know what? Thomas talked to them, and he couldn't trust it. So I want us to unpack how we can come to faith and still believe in something that's hard. The disciples needed to see Jesus before they believed. And some of you may be sitting in that same place with your doubts, going, I need to see something. I need to know that God is real. I want you to hear this morning very clearly. Your doubts don't make you alone. Everybody in this room has had doubts and struggles and discouragement. Everybody in this room has asked God, why? Why did you allow that? Why did you not stop this? Why am I struggling in this way? We all understand those doubts, and those doubts lead us to question God's existence or God's goodness. You're not alone if you have doubts. But I don't want you to just stop at doubts, because Thomas moves from doubts to declaring. Peter and John had doubts. They didn't know when they got to the empty tomb. Paul, who's going to write most of the New Testament, he had great doubts. He had so much doubt that Jesus was a risen Savior that he was trying to kill every single person that declared it. It wasn't until he saw Jesus on that road to Damascus that he could believe. Abraham, we'll look at his story in a little bit. He had doubts. Gideon, he had doubts. He said, God, I think you're telling me to do this, but in order to prove yourself, I need you to make this wet and to keep this dry. So God does it. He wakes up the next morning and goes, okay, crap, I may have got that mixed up. Was dew always going to keep that wet and that dry? So, all right, we're going to flip-flop it, God. Make that wet and this dry now. And he wakes up again. He goes, oh, okay, yeah, you're God. I trust you. We all struggle in those places because here's the deal. Faith is hard. Faith is hard. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist that doesn't believe in a moon or a moon landing or the earth is round to not believe in a God. Because what we're calling people to do is to believe in something they haven't seen. Faith is hard. You don't have to be a wacko to not believe in God. But I also believe that faith is the only thing that changes us, and so that's what we're going to unpack today. You and I are people of proof. We need to see, we need to hold, we need to touch, we need to taste, we need to feel. We need to have it. Here's why I know, and then we're going to jump into our text. Here's why I know we're people of proof. You and a friend can be arguing whether or not this actor was in that movie. Okay? You can be arguing, yes, Tom Cruise was in that. No, he was not. Yes, he was. I know he was. The friend takes out their phone, they begin to Google it, and they say, aha, he was not in the movie. And what do? Well, let me take my phone out and let me see if I can prove it. We don't even trust the people right beside us. We need to see it with our own eyes. And we still say something like, no, I'm pretty sure he was in there. I think IMDb's messed up. We are people that need the tangible proof. So let's look at Thomas's story. Verse 24. We're going to read 24 and 25. Now Thomas was one of the 12, meaning he was a disciple. He had been one that was following Jesus. He was called the twin. And he was not with them when Jesus came. Let's put a pin real fast. Go back real fast, John, for me. He was not with them. So when Jesus showed up to that locked door room, there was 10 disciples in there. Judas had already killed himself. Thomas had ventured out. Honestly, Thomas may have been the most brave one of them all, if he was willing to go out while everybody else was scared. But Thomas wasn't there when Jesus showed up. So verse 25. So the other disciples, they told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the marks of the nails, and place my fingers into the marks of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." Who is Thomas saying I can't trust? His friends. These are the men that he has walked paths with. These are the men he has spent the last waking days of the last 3 years with. He has slept beside them. He has eaten with them. He has spent every bit of his life with them, laughed and cried, gotten mad and angry and jealous and all of those things with. And they're going, all of them are going. They have the same story, and he cannot believe it. It cannot be true unless I see it. Why is Thomas so stubborn, so hard-headed? Because everything in Thomas's life has just been turned upside down. Jesus was supposed to redeem. He was supposed to reconcile. He was supposed to make it all right. Jesus was supposed to be the king. He was supposed to push back Rome. He was supposed to establish the nation of Israel as we should be. Jesus was supposed to be the one that was going to live forever, and I watched him die. Thomas cannot put out of his mind the lifeless body of Jesus. It makes no sense that they speak of a resurrection at all. Things that are dead do not come back to life. Well, Jesus raised somebody from the dead, absolutely, but he was alive when he did it. Dead things can't raise dead things. There's no heartbeat. There is no resurrection of yourself when you are dead. It makes no sense. Do you struggle sometimes to listen to the truth that others are trying to share with you because you're so consumed with the truth you've told yourself? One night this week, I don't remember, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, Cooper had gone to bed, and he called out and he asked me to come in his room. Now here's the backstory. You guys know Cooper, and Cooper's a really good kid. Cooper's the kindest, the sweetest. He probably asks you how your day's going before you can ask him how his day's going. He'll follow up with you about your trip or about something you had exciting or something like that. Cooper loves people. He is a great kid. But Cooper's not perfect. If you were here Thursday night, you saw Cooper gets in trouble sometimes. Cooper can be, he's a kid. He's a boy. That's what kids do. And so we all got in trouble, and he gets in trouble. He's no different. That's just what it is. But Cooper starts seeing himself as a bad kid when he gets in trouble. And so a phrase that I've begun saying with him a lot, we've added to, we normally say, "I'm never going to stop," and he says, "loving me." But we've added this where I say, "You are," and he says, "a good kid." And we're repeating that over and over. Hopefully it'll be branded onto his brain so he cannot forget it. Whatever night it was, it'd been kind of a hard day. He'd gotten in a little bit of trouble. And he called me to his room and he said this, "Dad, am I a good kid? Because I don't feel like it." I said, "Buddy, what do I tell you every day? What do I tell you all the time? You're a good kid." And I make him repeat it over and over because it's different someone saying it to you than you saying it yourself. Thomas was hearing from his friends, Jesus is alive. But he couldn't trust just their words. He needed to know it himself. He needed to feel it himself. He needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus is alive. And so many of us are struggling to trust even the encouragement of others, even the statements that they've made or the promises they've made, but we struggle to believe that that's going to be good enough because we're so worried about the rejection. We're so worried about being disappointed. And that's where Thomas is. He cannot get over the fact that the one that he trusted with his whole life was dead. Can he trust anything anymore? What can he rely on now? So his friends tell him everything that they saw, but he couldn't believe. Now read the first 3 words of verse 6 with me. What does it say? 8. This is read with me. We're going to try that again, all right? 8 days later. 8 days. 8 days of wonder. 8 days of confusion. 8 days of struggling, of frustration. 8 days of going, why did I have to leave at that time? Why didn't I just stay in the room? 8 days of playing theories out in your head of what kind of joke these guys are playing on me. 8 days of wondering what they're smoking or drinking or whatever because this guy's dead. 8 days of hearing them talk about a resurrected Jesus and you missing out on it. You ever feel that? That others are having experiences, especially in a spiritual way, that you're missing out on. That others are hearing from God and you don't. That others know how to pray and are seeing things they're praying for, but you can't. That others seem to be understanding in worship what's going on and that they're praising God and you're just sitting here hoping it's done faster. 8 days of just waiting. Have you ever felt that missing out? Like you're the only one on the outside, that everybody else is in tune with God and then you're just the outsider? For 8 days, Thomas sat in that position. But let's read the whole verse. It's verse 26 now. 8 days later, his disciples were again inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, if you reference back up to verse 19, on the evening of the first day, the doors were locked where the disciples were. Going back to verse 26, although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them. Same thing in verse 19. Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, "Peace be with you." And he said, "Peace be with you." This is a complete reset of what he did in John chapter 20, verse 19. Jesus does the exact same thing 8 days later. Most likely, it would be 7 days in our counting. 8 days starting on that same Sunday, and then coming back on that again the next Sunday. Don't get caught up in the math there. Anyways, Jesus shows up and does the exact same thing. It is a complete reset. I see only one reason for Jesus to have done that. Why in the world would Jesus come back and say the exact same words 8 days later or 7 days later? Because he needed Thomas to hear it. Jesus shows up with one purpose: for Thomas to believe. Jesus doesn't show up and say, "Thomas, why didn't you listen to them?" He doesn't show up and say, "Thomas, they told you. Did you not remember what I said? They said? Why are you so stubborn? Why are you so hard-headed?" No. Jesus shows up with the same offer, the same invitation to believe, not a condemnation of his disbelief. Do you hear that? Jesus shows back up with an invitation to believe, not a condemnation of his disbelief, because he wants Thomas to understand. He shows up just for Thomas. Do you see that? Friends, this is what grace looks like. He had every right to go, Thomas, you had plenty of information. But in the gracious love of our God, he shows up and says, Thomas, let's read verse 27. Put your fingers here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Jesus asks and invites Thomas into exactly what he needed to believe. Jesus says, I'm going to remove every barrier of belief that has been built up in your brain. And I want you to see, to feel, to touch, to experience what faith looks like and what the truth looks like. What I think is interesting from Thomas is he said exactly what he needed to believe. Unless I see the hands and the side, I will not. I'm reminded of Abraham in the Old Testament. Abraham also told God what he needed. See, in chapter 12 of Genesis, God tells Abraham, you're going to have a lineage, and your lineage is going to be great, and it's going to bless the whole world. And for about 10 years, Abraham waited to see that lineage. See, Abraham was 75 years old when that promise came to him. He was 75, and he waited for about 10 years, and then he goes to God, and he says, God, I'm still waiting on this lineage, and the only heir that's going to build this nation from me is a slave and my family, so I'm going to need you to start showing me some more. I'm going to need that son that you told me about. And God says, okay, I'm going to make a promise with you. I'm going to make a covenant with you in Genesis chapter 15. That you're going to have more sons than there's sand on the seashore. Your name is going to be great. Your nation is going to expand. He says, I know what you're struggling to believe in. And let me tell you in exact writing what it's going to look like. And it says in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, that Abraham believed and it was counted to him as righteousness once he saw and once he heard from God. You know how long Abraham had to wait to see his son born? Another 15 years. It took 25 years for him to see the promise. But he told God where he was struggling to believe, and God stepped in. Do you feel alone or abandoned? Do you feel like you're doubting and discouraged? Do you feel like you're disillusioned? That God isn't present? That he isn't real? Or that he's playing this mean game of silence with you? Are you sharing what you need? Are you sharing where you're doubting? Are you asking for him to show up, or are you just sitting there in your frustration and disappointment? Thomas says, I need to see. Jesus shows up to Thomas with compassion, not condemnation. I don't know that a resurrected Jesus will stand in front of you if you say, I need to see. But I do believe that God will give you answers to anybody that's desiring to know him and to follow him. I think he will give us the answers that we need. It doesn't remove all aspects of faith, but I do think God will show up. Let's read verse 28. We have two more verses. Thomas answered, my Lord and my God. Doubting Thomas turns into declaring Thomas. He says, my Lord. This means my supreme authority, the one that I submit to, the one that I follow, the one that I give my life to. That is what he is saying. You are the one that I am fully surrendered to, Jesus, and you are my God. You are the divine. You are connected to or the same with, and you can get into all this in theology, but you are God. You are Yahweh. You are the one. And he's looking at Jesus and he says, I am completely surrendering to you who are the divine deity above all. This is probably the highest Christological confession in all of the Scripture. Thomas, the one who was struggling to believe, is the one who makes it. See, Thomas wasn't rebellious. He was honest. He says, I just cannot understand how this could be. But the second he sees it, my Lord and my God. Verse 29, Jesus talks about kind of us now. He says to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Friends, this is where we sit. In the have not seen and yet believe. Peter writes of these people, writes of us in 1 Peter chapter 1. I'll just read it to us. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 8 and 9, it says this. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with a joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory. Friends, we sit in a world right now leaning on faith, believing in what we have not seen, and yet the evidence, the teaching, and our relationship with God is showing us that, yes, he is real. Let's end it this way. Everyone puts their faith in something. Whoops. Didn't put the word something. It kind of worked out. Everyone puts their faith in something. Right? We put our faith in something. I put my faith in that if I lean on this, it will hold me up. I put my faith in that if I'm thirsty, that I can go to the refrigerator and press a button and the water will shoot out. I put my faith in that when I put the key in the car or when I push the button, it will start. I put my faith in the driver in the other lane is going to stay in his lane and I'm going to stay in my lane. We all put our faith in something. We use faith all the time. We put it in small things like this chair is going to work or this email is going to send. We put it in big things. Like with our life, when we get on an airplane, I put my faith in this tube is somehow going to stay afloat and it's going to work and I'm going to be safe and I'm going to get there. We all put our faith in something. And honestly, we all put our faith in something for eternity as well. For some people, that means that their faith is in that when we die, it's over. Some people put their faith in a reincarnation. Some put their faith in a heaven that all people go to. Some people have a faith in a heaven and hell. Some people have a faith in that we will restart or we will just enjoy something else. I don't know. But we all have an answer to what we believe at the end of this life. Everybody puts their faith in something. The question is not if you believe in something. The question is, what do you believe in? Everybody has a faith in something. The question is, what do you have your faith in? What do you believe in? Cooper and I, he had to go to an appointment Tuesday morning, and so I was driving him there, and we were listening to his favorite podcast is a science podcast for kids. Nerd, but, whatever. It's a science podcast. It's really fun. It's enjoyable. They do a lot of voices. We like to reenact it. It's a good time. But they were talking about Earth. It was an Earth Day episode, and this science podcast leans into heavy science and very little God. Okay, so there are some episodes where they go, the earth is 300 billion years old, and we have a conversation about that and how creation could work within that, or also what we believe and all of that sort of stuff. But there's also some just really interesting things. They talk about how seaweed can help our brain develop, and it's all this interesting stuff. And they were doing an Earth Day episode, and the episode was making a commercial to talk about how great Earth is to everybody out there in the galaxy, that you should want to live on Earth. And it's talking about it has trees, and it has grass, and it has water, and it has air, and it has beautiful climates and mountains and all waterfalls and all of this sort of stuff. And it was making a pitch for how great Earth is. It says Earth is located in the Goldilocks neighborhood of the solar system, where it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. And then it said, and Earth was designed with this thing around it to help control the gases and the heat so that it was a perfect climate for life. And I thought, that's a really interesting word you just used. You said the earth was designed. See, there's a lot of people that think they're very, very smart, and they go, well, it just happened. Cells turned into this, and this exploded, and this turned into that, and then we evolved over this, and from this tadpole to this, to a monkey, to us, and it's all just happened, and it just so happened in the Goldilocks district with the perfect amount of ozone so that we could live and we could survive, and it just so happened. And that's a far-fetched thing to believe in my opinion. An intelligent and awesome designer that can build and make and creates from nothing honestly makes more sense to me. But I thought it was interesting when they used the word designed. Because our world points to a perfect creator who is designed for life. And we can try to explain away everything, but at some point we have to put our faith in something. Because nobody can prove the Big Bang happened. Nobody can prove that we came from this. We can show microevolution, that makes sense, but on a macro level, no. We all have to put our faith in something. And so I ask you, will you consider the proof of who Jesus is? Will the evidence of the Scripture, will the teachings that have been passed down, and will your relationship with a God that you can look to and lean on to, and even in your doubts call out to, who shows up and he steps in, not with condemnation but compassion, and an invitation to believe, not getting on you for your disbelief? Will you ask for the proofs where you're struggling with doubt? Will you ask for God to show up where you're struggling with disbelief? Will you accept the answers, or were you going to have to always take out your phone and try to prove it and just argue away every time? And will you respond to the proof that Thomas, in the same way Thomas does? When he is confronted with the truth, what does Thomas say? My Lord and my God. If you are confronted with the truth of who Jesus is today, and you go, you know what? I have been fighting against this. I am going to believe. Will you not just believe, but will you say, I will completely surrender to the perfect authority and that he is my God? Everyone puts their faith in something. The question isn't if you believe, but it's what you believe in. Like Thomas, you may be wanting to see before you believe, but maybe Jesus is already showing up behind the locked doors in your heart. And he's already going, I'm right here. I've been calling out to you. Will you actually listen? And will you respond? And will we live our lives as Thomas declares, my Lord and my God? Because Jesus doesn't just say, oh, look, here I am. He says, come and follow me. So will we live in response to the one that is the truth? Let me pray.